Hello, hi everyone, and welcome to this masterclass. So today we've picked a fantastic topic, qualifying the right candidates and matching them to the right markets. So I'm really happy to be hosting this session with Angelee Brown. Angelee is the CEO of Altius Franchise Group. And Angelee, it's great to have you with us. And we've also got incredible guest speakers joining us, and we're just thrilled to have you all here. So now today's topic is crucial. Franchisors are always looking for more candidates, more leads, but in the end, I think that what really matters is finding the right ones for your brand, but also the right ones for your target markets. So we'll talk about both sides today. So we've had nearly 50 franchisors signing up for this session. So I think there's clearly a lot of interest in this topic. And we've brought together some fantastic speakers today. So, and once again, we're lucky to have both US and UK franchisors with us to share their experience. And I think we've got all the ingredients here for a really great discussion. So, our goal today is to provide a session where franchisors share their knowledge and real world feedback and qualifying franchise candidates. And we can all benefit from Angeli's expertise as she has extensive experience working with many franchise networks. So, my hope today is that you'll leave having learned something new with fresh perspective for your own network and concrete actions to successfully recruit new franchises. So the agenda today, we'll take a few minutes for the speakers to introduce themselves, and then we'll go into the core discussion. We'll also keep some time at the end to answer your questions. There's a chat box on the right. So feel free to say hello and a few words about you, where you are, and send your questions as we go. We'll try to answer as many as possible at the end of the session. So we already have Dawn who said hello here. So feel free to drop your messages here. So maybe speakers introductions, just a few words about you and your franchise, Dustin. Maybe if you want to start.
Thanks, Laurent. Dustin Engel. I'm the CEO of Installation Commandos. We're a young, emerging home service franchise in the USA. We franchised the business in 2023. We currently have 26 franchisees and 80 territories open. Look forward to the discussion.
Thanks, Dustin. Brendan?
Yeah, thank you, Lauren. Brendan O'Shea, CEO of Just Clear. We're a clearance company with sustainability and customer service at the heart of it. In across the UK and Ireland as well, we do a little bit in Republic. We've been around for about 15 years, franchising for about 4 years, and we're definitely well into the journey, but still classed as emerging because we're only at about 42 territories out of 100. But yeah, loving it. It's got its challenges, and really looking forward to discussing my experience today.
Thanks, Brendan. It's great to have you with us. And Angelie?
Hey, so I'm Angelee, CEO of Altius Franchise Group. We have three organizations underneath the banner of Altius. My role as a CEO is just keeping the ship going with the different banners that focus on franchisee support, franchise buyers, and also ensuring that we're building stronger franchise systems. We have a little over 600 clients now throughout most of North America, some sprinkling over into the overseas area as well. Those clients predominantly are on contract to seek out candidates or to provide consulting services. And then today's conversation is really focused on finding the right franchisee for the right market, which is something that Laurent, you and I were really chatting about what to do for this masterclass back and forth. And one of the things that I'm noticing with the leverage in AI and things that are happening in our technology world is that sometimes the candidates get missed out on opportunities, or sometimes franchisor miss signs that will really help that getting that right candidate into the right market. So I'm really excited to have this conversation, ask tons of questions to Brendan and Dustin today, just to really go through things that are, maybe challenges that they're having, or focusing on how to be creative and work with a really great candidate and learn a little bit more about them before you say no. So yeah.
Yeah, thanks, Angelee. And I'm Laurent. I'm the co-founder of Smappen. It's a franchise territory mapping and location analysis software that's currently used by over 500 franchise brands, mainly in Europe and North America. Angelee, I'll hand it over to you to introduce the topic. Well, you already did, I think, and then lead the discussion.
Awesome. Great. Well, let's just dive right in. So today I really want this to be practical. We really want to focus on experiences and ask questions, and really focusing on getting the right franchisees in the right territories, like I mentioned earlier, Laurent. So I'm going to start off with anecdotal before I jump into our first question. And this is an experience that we just had last month. So we worked with a pretty large restaurant brand in North America. They have about 50 to 70 locations up here in Canada, and then another just about 15 that they're growing into the US, but they own a lot of other things. So they own other hotel chains and things like that as well. And so this particular brand, we had a candidate, and I think the franchisor on the call would appreciate this this story a little bit. We had a candidate that went all the way to the finish line. They had a very experienced franchisee in an established market that all of a sudden decided to put their hand up and say, you know what, wait a second. I heard word on the street is that you're going to have a candidate potentially in this market. And what do we do? Because, we own a bunch of locations that are surrounding, even though it wasn't in their territory. The franchisee expressed interest all of a sudden, even though they were asked previously that, you know what, we want to go and develop this multi-million-dollar restaurant in this market. And so all of us were kind of scrambling for a second, and then we recalibrated. And throughout that experience, you've got, first of all, a candidate that is late stage in the buyer journey, who has already had their heart and mind set on going to a specific state in the US, and that's where they want to open up their business. You've got a very well-established franchise group that has a lot of power. They've originated in one spot. And then at the end of the day, you've got a franchisor that's trying to make everybody happy. And if we're not kind of managing this properly on the back end, things can go sideways. You lose not only a great candidate, but you could also upset a franchisee. So what did we do? Well, we kind of took a step back, and we had a really heart-to-heart big discussion with the franchisee and said, look, we know that you were open to relocating in the past. The original market that you were looking at was more of a passion play, but let's kind of go through some of the history and things, as well as you and your wife and where you've lived previously in other parts of the US, and what would you be open to? So what we were able to do out of that conversation is to really dig out some pieces to that puzzle that we needed to put together to help this deal go through. And then at the end of the day, we've got a happy franchisor, a happy franchisee that was able to, kind of hold on to their market a little bit, start off on the right foot with the new franchisee coming in. But then the new franchisee also chose to relocate to a different market that actually, at the end of the day, was a better fit for them. So without really going through that process and understanding the nuances behind that, it can be challenging. You can lose deals, and obviously miss out on market opportunities as well. So this was something that was on nobody's radar, but we were able to kind of get through. And a lot of this inspiration has really been helpful for, helping out our clients and working with people, but also definitely want to learn a little bit more about Brendan and Dustin's experience in growing up their markets and their industries, right? Because you've got two different markets. So the first question I'm going to jump into today was really just starting at that beginning of that recruitment process. I focused on the end. We always like to keep the end in mind, but I'll start with posing the question. Well, maybe we'll start with Brendan. So, Brendan, what are the non-negotiables for you when it comes to like your personality traits, your skills, or your financial benchmarks that you're personally looking for your organization in the beginning of the candidate screening process?
I think the most important thing is trust. We're going into people's businesses and homes. We're servicing them inside their private spaces. It's so important that we have candidates that it's a people business, and people buy into people at the end of the day. We need like-minded individuals who want to really, really do the best service possible. I know it's a very, very simple job, but there's so much more to it. You're removing a number of unwanted end-of-life items from a property, whether it's domestic or commercial. You want to do a great job. You want to sweep up afterwards. You want to send them a report on all the data and where the items have gone in terms of ESG, in terms of, you know, what's the weight, what's the tonnage, what's the treatment, is it biomass, is it closed loop or open loop? So really want people to understand that it's not as simple as just collecting junk, and that would be the most relevant industry in the US to call it. We don't really call it junk here; we call it clearance. But so we're attracting a diverse range of individuals. They can be husband and wife teams. They can be from the corporate background. They can be from banking, insurance. They can be from, you know, home services industries that they have worked in themselves. We've had a couple of, you know, different sectors, and it's very, very diverse. The more latest ones tend to be deriving from industries that are replaced by AI. So, for example, copyright industry, and you have computing as well, which is like overseas or offshored. But really, the individual needs to become an ambassador for your company and represent your company so well. They're not there to receive jobs and, you know, do the work. They're there to grow a business, and that's the most important thing. And to relate to the customers and do a great job. I mean, it's very simple for us, but I take your point. There's always going to be challenges, which we embrace and we solve and we find solutions for along the way. But that's what makes it interesting, right? And we love it, you know?
Nice. Well, I love that too, when you talk about all the diverse backgrounds that you have that maybe could make sense coming into your business, because at the end of the day, your business is very, you know, focused on dealing with the public, the kind of the end user, the consumer, the customer, right? So somebody that comes from maybe a different background, but they've got, you know, great people facing ambassador skills, things like that they could pick up in any industry. You know, sounds like that would be a good fit. How do you determine that or discern, you know, I mean, other than like, yes, you have a conversation, you get a good vibe, you know, they feel it, like what kind of like benchmarks or non-negotiables do you have in your process?
So when I have someone ringing up, and the first question is, how much work can you give me? I know that I'm on to killing this phone call within minutes. You know, this person's not for us. They just want to receive. Give it all to me, and I'm not part of the process. So, you know, I'm looking for someone who really represents so well. I mean, our clients are global brands like L'Oreal. You have so many blue chips that buy into our brand and trust our brand to do a great service, you know, every day. And, you know, each location across the UK and Ireland have to be represented in the same way, consistency. They have to follow those values and those, you know, the success formula. And that's what it is, in effect. You know, if you don't want to listen, if you don't want to adopt our model, then it's not for you. And it's, you know, there's many people out there who carry on a similar business in a different way, and it can happen as well. But very much like, they have to adopt our values, and it is a very successful model that we have adopted and pioneered for the last 15 years. So there for that. But look, yeah, so it's really, really like, there was an old quote, which I always remember. Brian Scudamore from 1-800-GOT-JUNK often said it. And he said, if I'm in front of a person that is a person that I would invite over for a barbecue, then I know I'm onto the right one. So I always remember one, but I don't look to invite them to a barbecue. I haven't done it yet, but I look for them. You know, I have a different kind of analogy. I say, look, would I want this person in my own home with my family? You know, clearing my own home or clearing my own business. And, you know, that's the question I answer when I'm in front of these people, and I say yes and I say no. These are kind of like very fundamental things, but it goes back to the people and goes back to trust. It's so important.
Love that. You raised such great valid points on, you know, that relationship building and how that trickles down. That helps you through the good and the bad times, you know. So the first thing you don't want a franchisee to do is look to their FDD or to the disclosure, their agreement for the holes in the contract, right? So they can have a gotcha moment, so it's, if you build that relationship and do that gotcha, like you said, have a barbecue or have a beer. We say it here in Canada, if it can have a beer with somebody, then, maybe at the end of the day, it would make sense to at least take the conversation a little further. I love the point that you said about, even if they're asking, what can you do for me? In terms of, especially in a service or home services or any kind of that external business where they're really reliant on being able to go out there and sell their market or get in their market and get their hands a little bit dirty. And it's just not a good fit. So it sounds like that's definitely a non-negotiable for you. Somebody who's not willing to either put their hand up and do the work or do the sales, or at least be curious as to how do you do the work versus asking, like you said, what can you do for me?
Yeah.
Right?
But it's not as if we don't give them anything. We give them so much in terms of a bid team, access to a bid, access to national accounts. But they also have to go deep in the local area. I always have people say, I want a wide area. I want much bigger territory than you're offering. And I always say, you need to go deep, not go wide, because the more time, if you're skimming off the surface, if you're going like traveling in the motorway, the more time you spend on the motorway, the less money you're making on jobs, and the more fuel you're burning, especially now in this year in particular. So my localization of the service, going national but also local, is so important, is so key, and it will be the same for a lot of franchisors to go deep and go local.
Dustin, definitely want to get your feedback on this. Early stage, anything that you would like to add or kind of include as part of how you search for franchisees for your organization, and the strategy that you partake in, anything that's your non-negotiable?
Yeah, so for us, I think one of the keys to our success early has been franchise consultant relationships. Just working once you can get in with a couple consultants that know your brand, they've come out and visited the headquarters, they've been out on job sites, they understand, the nitty gritty of the business. They can take that back, and they do a lot better job of doing the initial pre-vetting for us, which in turns frees up more time for us to only talk to candidates that meet that initial pre-vetting. So I think that's key early, is just, make sure that you and the consultant are singing the same song early. There's no surprises during the process with the candidate. For me, I would say just early signs that it's a good fit or maybe not a good fit. I'm always looking for people that are humble. I find that they're more coachable. I don't care if you've worked for a Fortune 500 company as an executive, you're coming into a new industry that you don't really know anything about. And, a lot of your skill set you can bring into that, but, our business in particular, it's building science, and there's levels of knowledge that you've got to get over time to be efficient in building science. And, we can help you do that, but you've got to be open to coaching and just being humble. And then the other thing for me is, when I'm meeting a candidate early or towards the finish line, I look at it from my perspective. I mean, I'm going to sign the franchise agreement, and so are they. We're both going to sign it together, and it's a 10-year agreement. So we're going to be business partners for 10 years. So, can I see myself partnering with this gentleman or this couple for 10 years? Working with them day in and day out. So. Hopefully, I can have a beer with them at least, right?
It's funny, so I always give my partner in business, Jeff, I give him crap a little bit sometimes, because he uses the marriage analogy, when it comes to franchisee and franchisor in that relationship. And I said, no. I said, marriage is easier to get out of sometimes, at least if you want to move out of the house and go get a hotel for a week. I said, at least if the marriage is ending, you can do that. But, depending on your agreement, it is sometimes pretty tough just to say, see you later and walk away from your business right away. There has to be a wind down and a period of at least getting things still continuing, so you can sell or to right that ship before the business is sold or handed back to corporate. So I'm like, don't call it a marriage, because
Yeah.
And so we have a little in-house debate that continues on that statement. And like you said, 10 years is a long time, and hopefully 10 is more like 30 or 40 if they have kids or the kids have kids. And I love that about mature franchise systems, and you guys are starting to really see that as your businesses grow. Is we've done like third generation franchisees that you're now writing approval processes for corporate locations that they never had to really think about that before. But what do you do? If a grandchild puts their hand up and they're 18 or they're 20 and they're kind of familiar with the business, but they've seen what mom and dad or grandparents have done, and they're ready to take it on, or they think they are, right? So what is the approval process to get them on the other side? And that's the best part of the beauty of franchising, is that you've got a great family or a great person. That person usually, great family, great habits, and then they're passionate about your business and they continue to grow. Yeah, like Dustin, I wanted to pick your brain a little bit more. I've got another question for you. So when you look at, I'm going to talk about the not a good fit. So, you kind of highlighted a little bit of that, right? But do you have like a set of interview questions, or there's some subtle signs or things that you look for early stage that, there's just enough of them that you go, you know what, this is not a fit. Like it could be like, are they resistant, or maybe they talk negatively, or they've bought a franchise before and they talk bad about the franchisor, or I don't know, like, do you have specific things that you do look for that would help you say no faster?
I think for me, always say they will weed themselves out. Like when we're going through the process, if they're late to one of our meetings, we've got a meeting, like a validation meeting with a franchisee, or maybe they're meeting some of our team, or maybe it's just a map review call together. If they're late to these meetings, they're going to be late to the job site. And they're not going to represent the brand. If you can't manage your schedule, you're not going to be a good business owner. So, it sounds simple, but just some of those little red flags you can pick up on early, just punctuality, and, are they organized with their time? Kind of oversimplifying it, but you could be surprised, right?
Mm-hmm. Brandon, how about yourself with your business? Any kind of call outs or questions that you look for to get people to either self deselect or flags on that field that would make it an absolute no for you?
Well, yeah, I mean, look, I agree with Dustin, what he says. They do kind of reveal themselves. I really understand their background. I want to understand their background. Sometimes there's really good transferable skills that can lend themselves well into it. Sometimes I kind of see people, they're an introvert, and I feel that they will struggle. I kind of, ask about their relationship with, maybe a partner. Maybe they can bring a partner to help with that side, because not everyone is confident enough to go outside and represent and become an ambassador. So I always kind of work with them and see if there's a chance and give them the benefit of the doubt. But yeah, there is kind of telltale signs where you kind of have a red flag and you kind of say, okay, well, this is maybe needs a bit more thinking. I might take someone on on a part-time basis as a subcontractor for a month or two to give them a little bit of a trial. Sometimes that works because they might have just have a need to go on one of the trucks to experience the whole thing on the job for a month. Might do that on a rare occasion, but then I'd see some things I wouldn't want to see. Like, for example, they might go MIA for a week or something like that, or there might be these things, and it's a new relationship. They say an interview is a meeting of two liars. There's always going to be some people saying, okay, this is us, we're great, and then they'll say, okay, this is me and we're great. So, but I think the key here is obviously to be as transparent as possible and just to be open about it and to say, from our side, this is who we are, this is where we're going. Do you want to come along the journey with us? This is a very special place to be. Business model is by far there's a huge USP compared to others in terms of the model, and have the brands buying into us. But yeah, I mean, look, there's a gut feeling as well, and there's so much. But really now at this point, I'm looking for people who can either illustrate that they have managed a team. It doesn't have to be an entrepreneur. We're not looking for full-blown entrepreneurs. We're looking for people who want to dip their toe and step away from corporate or step away from a middle management job, and they have the experience. Okay, we've managed a team of 10, we've managed a team of 20, we've grown. I've had an amazing candidate come on board in Scotland, and he grew Dino Rod, which is a drainage company, from 0 to 22 vans. And he did take actually 3 years to make a decision. He was the longest one, but it was a kind of like, we wanted him on board. He wanted to come on board and he wanted to do it himself. And again, I could tell he was a very special individual. He had integrity, he had trust. Very often we're going into probate homes, which is deceased homes. And, you need that trust, and you need them to pass on that kind of integrity to their team. They need to hire like-minded people again. Again, it's more extensions of you and who you are. So I found kind of stick to those kind of the individuals. We've taken on an amazing one recently in Oxford. Ian, incredible guy, again, coming from Tetra Pak background, director level, also waste management background, but great experience. You could tell, he's really, really switched on, asking all the right questions. And I knew, again, the ambition is there, but it's not blind ambition. He wants to go to 10 vans in Oxford. And I know he can achieve it. I just you can tell already what he's doing is just all the right things and saying the right things.
Yeah, no, and I think it's great to see that, right? And my curiosity right away, as you start talking about the growth aspect, is a great segue into our second half of this conversation here, is really to focus on that territory and what they want, what you want versus what they are capable of doing and what they should do, and this is something that it evolves over time as in a franchise system. When you're a new franchise system, you're excited to have a franchisee, and then all of a sudden you've got 20, and now you're thinking about how do we manage these relationships, especially if you've grown out like in that hub and spoke type model, and all of a sudden people are saying, well, I want to grow in that market, and but well, you didn't sign a 3-pack or a territory agreement or do any kind of multi-unit. So people start getting a little bit antsy, especially as they see the success, right? And they start politicking, which is kind of interesting, especially as you get larger. So let's talk about territory and unpack some of this. How in the world? So you have let's look at candidate first, and then we can go to franchisee. But when you've got a really great candidate and they put their hand up and you don't want to let them go, whoever wants to jump in and dive in on this one first. But how do you choose if you've got candidate A and candidate B side by side? You want both of them, but they both want the same market. How do you choose, and what do you do with them?
Dustin, you want to go first?
Yeah, I think for me, it would depend on the market. Dallas, Fort Worth, I'd try to get both of them in there, right? And try to make it work. We've got 2 owners in Houston and 2 owners in Dallas, Fort Worth. And we found that those markets crush it from like an SEO perspective. I mean, just all around, the advantage of having 2 physical locations and twice the marketing efforts in a single market is awesome. So a big market, I'd love to try to figure out where to divide those lines so we could get both of them. The smaller markets, where the population's less than 1 million, you've got to make a decision, and I've seen some franchisors that are transparent with it. They let each other know, hey, we're also working with this other candidate. I've seen other franchisors kind of use that as a sales tactic to try to create urgency. There's different ways to approach that. I don't think there's any right or wrong answer, but at the end of the day, we want, our business has always been we want less owners with bigger territory, bigger businesses. And we've kind of done that. I think our average franchisee has 4 territories, and they're marketing to about 1.6 million people each. So that's kind of my stance on it is, we would have to pick one, probably the one that's the best fit, the most aggressive, maybe the most experienced from leadership. There's a lot of things to consider in that, but I mean, at the end of the day, you just want the best candidate, right?
Yeah, exactly. We've had individuals whereby they want the same territory as someone else, and it's down to the best candidate. Like Dustin said, it's down to what can they bring to the table. In terms of territories, a lot of people express a wider area than they want, more territories than offered. So, like for example, they might want 4 or 5, which we take a view on, like you can have one and then tag the others, so you can operate in the others and just buy one. It's not about the money for us, because at the end of the day, we want the right people on board, and we want to see that they can grow and they can have a plan that they can grow this franchise. So it's not about us taking their money. Some of them might want to buy now. We're saying just buy one, and we will make you guarantee that we won't sell the others around you. You will have first refusal. Maybe after year 2, year 3, you're saying, I definitely want them now. And you can take them on kind of like with cash flow or with some debt. And like that way, it's much more organic. It's not like you're biting off more than you can chew. So I like that way, because it just eases everything off and it just puts less pressure on them. I like doing royalty-free periods to begin with as well. Again, that's at my discretion for maybe 3 months or something like that. Again, help them all with the cash flow. But, most of them, they're in profit straight away from the get-go. But territories, yeah, it's about, I think, the ambassadors, they need to really, really focus on their local area. If they're living in that area for a long time, if they grew up in that area, they know all the the individuals, the people, the businesses. It really, really helps. Versus they're new in the area, they just moved in, or they're going to move in, they're going to relocate, like you said earlier, their relocation kind of conversation. That's kind of something you want to kind of take into account as well. But again, the point of it here, they're leveraging off of the brand name. Suddenly, Just Clear is in that area, and then you need to go loud and proud and really, really fly that flag, which I think is the key point.
Brendan, you brought up the right of first refusal. I don't know how many scenarios you've dealt with that. We early when we first started, we were pretty aggressive with the right of first refusals. Like, yeah, we'll give you the rest of the city for 3 years, that kind of thing. And now we've got some of those markets where we've got candidates looking at those areas, and we're having to bring that potential deal to the existing franchisee. And so we've had to have some of those conversations. And I think Angelee kind of opened up with that conversation. But how have you navigated those transactions with the right of first refusals?
Yeah, I mean, I've had interested parties that are like aware that the territory is tagged to a neighboring franchisee, and they kind of have backed off. Then they kind of said, okay, fair enough, it's tagged. So they're not as aggressive. They would kind of say, okay, I'll look at another territory, or I'll come back to you on it. Because I'd have to be transparent, because I'm not going to do something to upset the franchisee either. I'm not going to sell their territory that they've tagged in, and I'm not going to, I think I'm going to make sure the comms are there and make sure they're kind of saying, okay, well, Brandon just had a chat with me. He's got an interested party. We've developed several great relationships in that area. Are we willing to give it up now, or should we just go ahead and buy it? But this has been happening, and I think at the end of the day, I think we just need to manage it and make sure it's communicated right, and everyone comes up with an agreement. But I do like, I think a lot of franchisors do like a lesser amount of franchisees and bigger territories, and that's where you get a lot easier management.
Yeah,
works much better, and then they can scale to a decent fleet. In my case, and your case, rather than having single franchisees, owner operators in dotted around every kind of area. Admittedly, I do have a mix at the moment. And that's just been because I've come across some really nice people who were not capable of, making a 5-10 vehicle fleet, and rather they're kind of modest and saying, look, I want to take a small area, low density population, and I want to do, two vehicles. And that's okay too, for now. But the great thing is, in the future, they have the option to not just sell a business, but sell a franchise, and it's the brand, and it's the going concern, and it's the clients, and it's that what you built up, over time, and it becomes a lot more powerful, a lot more valuable for those franchisees if they do want to sell, or if they want to pass it on to a second generation.
Exactly. I love that. The second gen is really interesting. One of the things I didn't share early on is that our family, we're a third generation franchise family. And so we kind of grew up in that environment of just always somebody in the family being involved in franchising. And it's interesting now, you see the kids these days, I'm going to call it, sounding like a boomer, but, you see the younger generation, and they're more open to different kinds of franchise options. They see how it can benefit, but not necessarily is it what used to be, where predominantly it was restaurants. We're seeing a lot of service-based businesses that, it can become a family business, or it can get sold to second gen. And really help them out, right? And help that family out, which is really nice. I'm curious as to markets. So relocation and location of families. We've dealt with this a lot, and I'm just curious as to hear your take on this from both of you in terms of as the family grows. So maybe you've got somebody that starts out in Nashville, and all of a sudden they do have that second gen, that son, daughter that grows up, they get married, and they call you up and say, Dustin, we love your business, but, we want to involve our son more in it, and his wife, but they're moving to Florida. What can you do for us? And so how do you determine that market fit? Maybe you've just got a family member that's been involved in the business or been around the business. Maybe they're not exactly the best franchisee. It's dad, mom kind of holding on to the dear life, making sure that things run. But I mean, at the end of the day, if you have that overhead, have you had to deal with that kind of like, how do you separate out your territories, choose those territories, relocate them potentially? Is that something that you've had to encounter in either your past or right now in your current business?
So far, with us being so young, we don't have any Gen 2 franchisees scenarios yet. Looking forward to that in, hopefully in the next few years. We've had a couple franchise owners bring up wanting to add a second location in another state, across the country. So we are navigating a few of those right now. We've got right now we have one owner that's running 2 physical locations that, they're not within driving distance of each other, from the same shop. So early stages, so I think for me it's TBD. I think I don't have any experience dealing with the Gen 2 scenario, but I would just evaluate the the son or daughter or nephew, whatever it is. I would just want to evaluate them the same way that I would evaluate a new candidate. If I have a relationship with them, if they've been around the business and for years and they already know it, that's a huge advantage for us. So that'd be an easier decision to make, whether if I didn't know them or not.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. The one thing I like about the second gen when you get there is that at least they have almost like they're afraid to make mom and dad or mom or dad look bad. You know, if it is that family member and they're lobbied in, you know, we've done one of the consulting gigs that we did early stage was we had a multi-unit restaurant franchisee. They started out with a couple locations and then they were bringing in their cousins and uncles and things like that. And it's a big investment. It was like $1 to $2 million minimum per restaurant they were opening. They had a vision. They wanted to grow to 16 in a period of 3 years. And then they wanted to double that by year 5. And so corporate had a lot of barriers in place for them to get there in terms of operationally, because they needed to have the managers in place. They had, I think, 28 managers in that outfit when they had about 16 locations. And so it's tough, right? Because I feel like in larger systems, if there are some people, franchisors here that have some larger systems, it's like balancing that weight of power almost, because you don't want to, you want to help that family grow, but you don't want to have a franchisee that is so influential in their market, or they have so many locations that they have the loudest seat at the table and they overpower or over dominate some of the other franchisees that have potential, right? Especially those ones that, you know, might be open to relocating, which is a strategy and an interesting play to, especially if you've got a franchisee that you want to get out, you know, but not that I've ever had to do that before, but you know, we've had challenges with that too. You know, ones that are just ready to leave and it's beyond their expiration date, so to speak, right? Or we know that they don't have a succession plan or nobody's there to take that business over. And a lot of franchisors are left scrambling, right? So complexity of territory. So you both talked about your big territories and you know, how you kind of map that out, and one's a little bit larger than the other. One, you know, do less with more. And so as we know, we kind of agree that territories are not created equal. So when you look at an operator for an urban market or versus like your secondary market, are there any new nuances or criteria that you are considering or looking for? I know we talked about the fit component, but small market versus large market that might have a lot of growth potential. What are your do's and don'ts when you're looking for somebody for those markets?
For me, if I have a candidate that wants to come in and hire a manager and a sales rep right out the gate, and they're in a small rural market, I'm going to be a little more hesitant to approve that. Those smaller markets, they, you know, just statistically, you're marketing to less people in a bigger, more rural area. So you're not going to get as many leads, you know, as downtown LA, you know, or Atlanta, you know, one of these tier 1 markets. So you have to play that factor into, you know, what their plan is as a franchisee. So those smaller markets, I prefer owner operators. They're going to come in, they're going to run the business lean. They're going to run the day-to-day. They also need to be the mayor of the town. They need to be good at networking. A B2B background would be great in those small markets, because there's only so many leads we can buy in those markets. You know, they're going to have to get out and network, Chamber of Commerce, Home Builders Association. You know, it might take them a year to develop those relationships that they need to grow the business, right? So those are some things that I look at in the smaller rural markets, you know, versus like a big city where, you know, we can turn the leads on and open the floodgates day one, right?
Yeah, for the rural markets, it's always a little bit of a topic, because we do cover remote areas like remote Wales, which is the Welsh countryside, and we also cover islands of Scotland, which is very, very remote, and there's a few islands as well. So we don't have territories marked in there. We've no intention of putting a franchise in there, but we just have to service it and travel in, charge a small bit extra, because we have in those towns, we have forestries and rural communities that need servicing, from fly tipping, not too sure what you call it in the States, but it's basically when the illegal dumping of waste and we collect it after they dump it. But But yeah, so with those kind of areas, like Dustin said, you need your higher density area, you need your chimney pots, you need your population, you need diversification. They can't be reliant on a single contract like that. They need to be tapping into hotel chains, restaurants, retail, flats, houses, and businesses. So there's so much in housing associations as well. So there's so much there to kind of, to reach out to in different ways, shape, or form. And there's a different service for every one of them. Some of it is outside, some of it is inside. But yeah, with regards to serviceability, we have to, because we have national accounts, we have to service those areas we travel in from the nearest neighboring territory.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So question that I have to follow up on that then, at what point in your current recruitment processes are you both sharing, whether it's like, when you talk about territory market research or territory data with a candidate, and how important it is to you both for them to do the homework versus you bringing some homework to the table so they can take that away and build their plan?
So I use Smappen for that. I used to use another company, but there was, I trialed it for a good 2 years, and it was falling way short in terms of data and user friendliness. And it's really, really good to bring that data to a meeting, even the initial meeting or the follow-up, which I can, there's information everywhere now, but it's the more kind of structured information data that Smappen have collated that is really useful. So we're using that for territory mapping and extracting as much data as we want from it. They can also use it. They can also ask us to kind of like tailor whatever industries they want to go after. Some franchisees want to go after particular industries and particular sectors. Like, for example, they might be saying, okay, well, probate's, a very, very easy one because it's always going to be there. Sadly, people are going to die all the time, and we need to process in the right way. We have a very good offering for that. Recovering items to auction houses for the families and recovering items into charity shops, which is really special. It's really rewarding. That could really, really get a person hooked on the job of being a just franchisee, because you're waking up in the morning, you go to bed at night, you feel good about what you're doing. And that's an amazing place to be. And that's where we started off, So getting back to look, territories, there's I think it's very important to tap into the data. There's loads of new stuff coming on board now, like data centers popped up. There's like 7 different data centers popped up in one territory, and it wasn't in any other territory. We didn't see that before. That's kind of the newbie, and you couldn't really get that information from normal sources. You need to really kind of just tap into it from a commercial angle. And again, they're the kind of things we service, because they get end of life assets inside there for what are air conditioning units or pallets delivering the items inwards, whatever, But yeah, so obviously Lauren is on the call, but so Smappen is really, really good. I'm not just saying that, they're actually a very, very user-friendly, quick platform that's it's part of the process. We share it. Like the question you asked, we do share it at an early stage, because to give them that overview of what their area looks like, because they might not look at it normally in that way. They might not see it. They might say, okay, this is a busy area. It seems nice. But we didn't know all this was there,
Such a good point, because like people, exactly that, franchisees don't see demographics the same way a demographic or a mapping software sees demographics, or a franchisor sees demographics, right? It's and that's why I think to your earlier point was, when people are asking more, I need a bigger territory. Like, wait a second, let's first go to the data. Can you even manage or handle this? This is how we assign our market or assign our territories, is because of this reason. We want to set you up for success. Sometimes, more is not always better, right? And then you're going to be missing out, and you're going to be driving farther to go service. And and all of that. I've seen that where people are, they've said, well, I'll drive 3 hours if I have to go service somebody. And I said, okay, let me get that straight. You're going to go drive three hours to go make, maybe $80, net on that service call or whatever. Like, does that make sense to you? Or would you rather be in a tighter market? Oh, okay. That makes sense now. Right. But you kind of have to walk them through that, and not because they're not educated or they're not smart or they don't have amazing backgrounds. Right. It's just like, their minds are just not there yet. They have to get engaged and start to see the numbers and see the data in a way that makes sense for the business. And then that also makes sense for them. That's easy to digest, right? Because it's a lot. They're getting a lot of information in a sales process. So, they can forget, they can get overwhelmed. They can be like, oh my gosh, right? So how do you keep it simple for them, right?
Yeah, exactly. And extract all the information for them, present it to them. All the law firms, all the real estate agents, all the housing associations, you name it, you got to present it to them, and we're going to formulate an approach which would work to get that business in and be that go-to clearance company in that area, be that for everyone. And you want to be seeing those vans and that logo in that area all the time, and really, really align with everyone in the local area. That's the key. That's what makes me smile.
Nice. Laurent, I just want to check in on time because we're at 11:51.
Yeah,
we have a few. We have a few questions in the chat.
Yeah, we do. One from Gavin. First question: How much time would you allow someone to decide to take on a franchise? Like, I think maybe Dustin or Brandon said sometimes, it can take a while. So, what's your usual time frame?
Also, I'll give you an example. Before we started Installation Commandos, I did franchise development for a brand called Kim Dry. I'm sure you guys know Kim Dry. They're all over Canada, all over UK.
Yeah.
And I did Fran Dev, and I had a candidate that it took about 18 months from the time that I got the introduction from the consultant to signed for franchise agreement. And they ended up being literally franchisee of the year, first year. They are the advisory council for the Southeast, poster boy for the brand, the first 3-4 years. Great family. It was there was just all kinds of hurdles that in front of him before he could do it. He was a police officer in Orange County, California, and he wanted to relocate out of California. This is like early COVID. And, so he had to sell his house, that whole process of selling the house. And then the kids needed to finish the school year up, then they had to figure out where they wanted to move and then find a home, close on the home, just that whole process. And I mean, over the year and a half, I became like best friends with the guy. And he ended up being a great franchisee. He's still one of their top franchisees. He's bought out some of the older ones in the area and absorbed them into the business. And so I don't think you can put a time limit on it. You got to be patient. It's a big decision. A lot of times it pays off though, if you're patient, but I wouldn't reserve a territory for somebody for 18 months.
They need to be the right person. I mean,
right.
I had a 3-year wait, and it was very, very similar to that gentleman. It was basically his personal circumstances, kids, mother, and, juggling the end of his other career and transitioning. But meanwhile, very similar, got to know him and had regular conversations with him, knew he wasn't a time waster. And he was pragmatic, and it's paid off. He's growing his fleet now, and he's doing a great job, booked out every week. He's managed to get really decent people on board as well, which are graduates, really, really the same as him, going back to integrity. And I mean, I couldn't be happier. And and actually, funnily enough, he did come to my family home for dinner after his training one night. So that's the barbecue test done. But he's amazing. I would just say, depending on the person, they're worth the wait.
Just probably like a weekly or a monthly check-in. It could be 15-minute phone call. Just check in with them once a week, see where they're at. If they need anything. Not a big time commitment.
Okay, thanks. Very
I
clear.
love that. We suggest those weekly check-in calls, and that's exactly it. What we do, that's your big friend of background in the chem dry world, Dustin, coming out, because you have to manage your calendar too, right? Between your current franchisees, and then your pipeline of interested candidates in your current business. And so it's like, okay, what's the best day of the week that we can just shoot the breeze, talk about where you're at with things, answer any questions, come to the table, 15 minutes, 30 minutes. Let's get that in there, make it recurring as we're going through this process. And if you need something urgent, you can text me, or, a lot of people, we know 97% plus people respond to a text message in under 2 minutes. So it's like, you can just text me back, but that's our time. That's our one-on-one time to really, therapeutically go through the process with you, make sure that we both end up on the right side of this at the end. So I love that.
Thank you. And another question from Dawn. So what are your thoughts on prospects who show strong engagement during the early and mid stage of the sales process, but become less responsive once they reach the investment stage? Do you have a pre-qualifying steps that you use to deselect these prospects? How do you deal with that? Justin?
Yeah, for me, like I said before, is they'll weed themselves out. If they lose interest, last thing I want to do is twist someone's arm to join our brand. So if it's not a good fit, it's not a good fit, and I just move on.
Yeah, same. I just wish them well, and they can move on. Sometimes they go back into an employment role. I've had situations whereby then they reach out to us and use us as from their company. So yeah, it's not for everyone, franchising.
Or they reach out to you 6 months later. They reach out.
Yes, I have had that as well, and it's sold then. Yeah. But hesitant people, and people that are not sure. It's always going to be the case. It's going to be a transition, and franchising is new to a lot of people, and they need to understand it. That's why sessions like this are so good.
Thank you. And unless we have more questions, I don't think so. So we still have a few minutes. If you have more questions, we can take some time to answer them. Otherwise, I don't think. I think we're done.
Yeah, on LinkedIn, if you.
Exactly. So So if you have further questions, so I would like to continue the conversation, feel free to contact Angelee, Dustin, or Brendan, or myself through LinkedIn. I think it's probably the easiest. Thank you all for joining us, and great conversation today. So thanks you everyone. We'll be sending out the replay shortly, so feel free to share it. Thank you everyone, and have a good day. Thank you.